So my name is Kaitlund Zupanic. I love drawing dragons and looking up different ways that I can create dragons and make worlds that they live in. They're just what I eat, sleep, and breathe for the most part. But I love just drawing and painting them.
So I'm Jessica Day George. I'm a best-selling author of 15 books, young adult and middle grade, all of them fantasy. And my very first book, published book, was called Dragon Slippers, because I am a huge dragon junkie. When I was 4, my parents went to Disney World without taking any of us children, and so they brought us back each a gift to make up for that, so we would let them back in the house. And what they brought me was a little t-shirt and a stuffed figment from, do you remember the Journey into Imagination there at Epcot? The reason why they brought me this t-shirt and the stuffed dragon was not because they wanted me to like purple dragons. It was because Dreamfinder, who was originally with Figment and his dream finding machine, was a red-haired man, and I am the only redhead in my family, and my parents wanted to make sure, also my mom, that I felt special and loved and beautiful for having red hair. So I had only red-haired dolls. I had every kind of Cabbage Patch Kid, all with red hair. I had all the different kinds of strawberry shortcake, but none of her friends. I had every Anne of Green Gables thing you could possibly imagine. So my mom brought me this little t-shirt that had this red-haired man on it, so I'd feel special like this red-haired man, and then also brought me a stuffed dragon that was his dragon, and what I latched onto was the purple dragon. And I have collected dragons ever since. I have every kind of thing. I have pajama pants and jewelry, and instead of a rocking horse, my kids have a big riding dragon with a saddle on it down in the basement, and so any books, any movies, anything like that, no matter how crap that Dragonheart movie was, I still own a copy on DVD, you know? Like everything dragon, and so naturally my first published book that was like the best, I'd written several manuscripts and they were all Drek, and then I suddenly wrote this thing about what would happen if your family tried to sacrifice you to a dragon. Like take, Andromeda chained to the rock in Clash of the Titans type of thing. Take you up to sacrifice you to a dragon because there are too many mouths to feed, and the dragon comes rushing out of its den and is like, I'm too old to deal with this. And I'm just like, oh, that would be such a diss. The dragon doesn't want to eat you, So there went my first story, and I have actually since then, there's a trilogy about the dragon specifically, but in every single one of my books contains the word dragon at least once. Someone mentions a dragon, there's something called the dragon, something, green dragon in type of thing. I always have to have the word dragon in all of my books.
And my name is Cedar Sanderson, and I have written several books with dragons in them, including one book that was titled Dragon Noir, so that seems kind of obvious. And in writing dragons, I have tried to write more than just one kind of dragon, because there are so many kinds of dragons. It's kind of amazing. I'll get into that more, but I also am an artist and have drawn dragons. I started out drawing dragons because everybody likes dragons. So I would draw a dragon and people were like, oh, that's cool, do another one. So I wound up with a coloring book called Inktail and Friends, and Inktail is a little dragon. And I also make dragons out of chainmail, so I've kind of gotten stereotyped as a dragon lady. I didn't mean it to start this way. I was more of a cat person, but now it's dragons and cats, which are a fun combination.
There are a lot of similarities there.
There are. So I thought what we might want to start out with here is we're going to talk about the origins of dragons. So I would like let's start out talking about some of the mythology, some of the furthest stories back that we might know of about dragons and the origins of dragons in human myths and legends. I've been doing a lot of research into Russian myths and folklore for something that I'm working on, and I came across this really interesting little snippet of a comment that an anthropologist threw into the book I was reading, which is that some of the dragons in the Russian folktales he was talking about actually stemmed from India, and the serpent demons that were in the Indian folklore, which it never really occurred to me because I tend to think of Russian myths as being more European. but there's an equally strong connection to them to Asia. And so Asian dragons and Western dragons are very different. So this was kind of one of those. That's fascinating. Also, the idea of a dragon with iron jaws and teeth is just like mental images. But so I would like to pass this up. Whichever one of you wants to go first? We're going to talk about myths.
Isn't Tiamat the Indian? Is Tiamat Indian?
One of them, yes.
So the mother dragon that spawned the world is Tiamat, which is a dragon. And one of the things that's always fascinated me about both dragons and unicorns is that you can literally go to like any society, and actually more so, dragons more so than unicorns because they're superior, obviously. But there is, all over the world, every society has some sort of giant magical serpent. And people are like, well, lizards. And I'm like, no. There is no way that your whole experience is like 3-inch long salamanders. Your mind is going to extrapolate to it flew and breathed fire and burned down our village. Like, there has to have been something at some point. They're mentioned in the Bible. Like, so I get super into that because my degree is basically in Norwegian folk tales. Like, I have the most useful degree of all time. I have a degree in German and Norwegian fairy tales. It's super hireable, if you're wondering.
That sounds awesome.
I'm not saying that it's directly applicable to what I do now, and it was a really awesome degree. I could have gone on forever if my husband hadn't needed to move to New Jersey. Why you need to move to New Jersey, I still do not know. But it was really fun, but it was so fascinating because you would just be reading some other fairy tale and Icelandic, and all of a sudden they'd be like, and the great ice dragon. You're like, oh yeah, we're getting good now. Thank you, Leif Erikson. I lost my boats because of a giant ice dragon coming out of the North Sea, and I'm like, did you? Tell me more. And so they pop up everywhere, and a lot of times they're like creators, they're not destroyers. The destroyer thing seems to have come from the British trying to explain why their villages kept burning down or something like that. But there are so many, especially Asian dragons, that are creator dragons. I think the Korean dragons were creator dragons. The Japanese dragons are the creators and guardians of the seas and things like that. And it's so fascinating because they are different physically, and yet they seem to have similar powers, and they're attributed with wisdom and healing and all these things. And you're like, tell me more, because they had to have been real at some point.
Yeah, basically all of what just was said is absolutely some of the reasons why I've fallen in love with dragons. But you look back, and a lot of times they think that the discovery of course, dinosaur bones, all of the bones that they found in all of these dig sites, you have to find some way to explain it, or some way to, you see like 2-inch teeth and you're like, wow, where did that come from? That thing must have been huge, especially with, the giant like T-Rex skulls and everything else like that. But with Asian dragons are definitely one of my main loves. With, you go to the Chinese dragons versus the Japanese dragons, with the Chinese dragons having the more toes. I believe it was 5 toes. Was the emperor.
The celestial 5-toed dragon.
And then you
very
go,
important.
It is extremely important. And you don't want to be drawing a Japanese dragon with, 5 toes, because they had 3. And they also generally held the pearl, correct? Or was it? It was the Japanese dragons,
or
the Chinese dragons hold
the pearls of wisdom in their foreheads, and people go on quests for that pearl and things like that.
Exactly. I'm not as big.
Japanese dragons were really almost like sea serpents.
Yes.
So.
I haven't done a whole lot of. I used to do a lot of dragon mythology when I was younger. I kind of side railed that a little bit, but. It's definitely interesting just to see, like, even just the amount of toes that they have, how they each created different versions of a dragon in each society, and European versus the Japanese.
And it's Japanese and Chinese culture, like, for many years they sort of were trading things back and forth a little bit, and they did not call it trading, but you know what I'm talking about. Like, a lot of things were inspired by one, and then they developed it, and then inspired the other. So it's so fascinating that so close together, and with them trading culture back and forth for so many years, they came up with very different dragons.
Yes. Even looking back at I believe the Anunnaki Some of the very oldest, earliest civilizations even had dragon mythology. It's like you said, something that's always been, I feel, a part of humankind, of mankind, spiritually. We just always want to express a dragon somehow.
We always want to. I'm going to have that on a T-shirt.
Express
You
the
always
dragon.
want to express a dragon somehow.
just to have a dragon.
So that's actually really interesting. It kind of brings me into my next little note that I jotted down, which is that, so we have 5-toed dragons, we have 3-toed dragons, we have dragons with wings, we have dragons without wings. We have dragons that breathe fire, dragons didn't, or that spit venom. So it's fascinating because this is almost, and if I put my scientist hat on for a minute, that's my day job, I'm a scientist, I go, okay, well, we're talking about different speciation here. So evolution from a common ancestor leads to different phenotypes. So that almost goes back into the, why do we have all these legends if they didn't really exist? I mean, where did these different, the Norse dragons that look totally different from the Chinese dragons? So it's kind of a cool thing to look into as far as the physiology goes.
I love it that you just used the word phenotype, and this is like the greatest thing ever. Because yes, you're justifying all my totally non-scientific, my yearning for these to be real, and you're like, it's talking about speciation. I'm like, yes, it is. That's the word. Who here has read, by the way, I was going to say, because I love the books, and they're the more recent books that are doing this very scientifically. Has anyone read the memoirs of Lady Trent? Yes. Oh my gosh, treat yourself.
And now I have to make a note because
noted.
You would die. Oh, you would die. Oh my gosh, what is the author's name? It's
Marie
in the...
Brennan.
What?
Marie Brennan.
Marie
Okay.
Brennan is her last name. I was going to say, it's in the B's on my shelf,
Not
but...
her real name, but that's what it's...
Oh, yeah, yeah. So Marie Brennan, and they are illustrated like with like diagrams, like anatomical drawings, and she is like a Victorian lady in England, and they do have dragons. They have dragons, and her husband is a scientist, but she is too. And so it's one of those things where the lady goes along to be with her husband and ends up being the one making the scientific discoveries. And she's sort of on like with Darwin on the Voyage of the Basset type of thing, except dragons. And they have very different species depending on location, and some of them have never been seen, and there's the one society that does not allow women near their dragons because, you know, the women stay in the women's house and the men go see the dragons, you know, and stuff like that. And she is making, it's illustrated with her anatomical drawings of her dissecting like these little tiny, you know, fire lizard type of dragons that are very common. They're in everyone's garden, those stupid little things. Anyway, and she's figured out how to preserve them in jars, and the memoirs of Lady Trent. So fabulous. And then the other one that is doing similar to, well, there's of course Naomi Novik's, you know, fighting Napoleon with dragons, which they have different species all over the place, and they're even like breeding new ones and stuff like that. But oh my gosh, I lost it. It was on the tip of my tongue. There's somebody else that's doing it very like a scientifically, these are what dragons are like, and we're going to do this. If I think that later.
Okay. I was going to say, someone had recommended to me, and I had just got it before I left, so I haven't had a chance to look at it yet. It's by Peter Dickinson, and I believe it's called The Flight of Dragons. But
The Dragon and the George.
It's not The Dragon
It was
and the
made
George.
into a cartoon called Flight of Dragons.
No, this is actually a book that is exploring different dragon physiology and a lot of the mythology. And I had commented that I was going to be on this panel, and one of my friends was like, have you read? And I'm like, no, I'd never heard of it. So I hopped on Amazon, but it didn't arrive
So it's Gordon
until...
Dixon.
Peter
No,
Dickinson.
Peter Dickinson.
Peter Dickinson. Okay.
Yeah.
Because
No,
Gordon Dixon
I
did...
know what you're talking about there.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, so Gordon Dixon did The Dragon and the George, which became the beloved cartoon of my childhood, Flight of Dragons, which is actually better than the book, surprisingly. But so Flight of Dragons by Peter Dickinson.
I know it's Peter Dickinson. Don't quote me on the title because I'm not looking at it.
It's
at
just the
moment.
Flight of Dragons.
It's just
It's
Flight of
literally just the Flight of Dragons.
Okay,
And it's
thank
more
you.
like a picture book type.
Yeah.
I love it.
So
It's wonderful.
And there's Dragonology. Remember when all the ologies came out a few years ago? Egyptology. I love the Dragonology one. I had the Dragonology calendar for like 2 years now.
Yeah, as the artist part of me goes, the whole thing of the concept of having different species, different types of dragons is appealing because you do get that whole range of expression. And I see, the thing is that I shouldn't say this because I'm
Now you have to, because we're all teased.
well, I was going to say, I always describe myself as not being a professional artist, but that's not true because I sell a lot of art. So, by strictly definition of professional artist, I guess I am one. But my thing is that I can't draw anything I want to. So I can't draw fierce dragons. All my dragons are really cute. Someone once told me that this is an expression of the fact that I'm a mother and I love everybody, and so therefore, of course, everything I draw is going to be cute, and I can't do fierce dragons. I know, I thought it was complete BS too, but but it's one of those things where we can go with I'm gonna butcher this name again because I'm really great at looking at things and reading them and recognizing them, saying them not so much. But I think it's Magnus and Albert is the little cat and dragon art prints that I think I see at every con all the time. And they're really cute and sweet. But then again, we also have the dragons that like Bob Eggleton does that are really fierce and commanding and their presence. So it's interesting that dragons have this personality that we can interpret in so many different ways. So I thought I'd drop that one and go with let you guys take that again.
Well, I'd say it's like looking at Toothless versus, like Reign of Fire type thing. Like you have the epitome of the cute and cuddly dragon versus...
He's like a kitty.
He is like a kitty. Like I saw it in the theater and I'm like, I want one. Give me. And then at the time we had a black cat, so of course it was relatively toothless. But there's so many cool things that you can express with dragons. Like the sky is really the limit, honestly, and you can fit a dragon to any personality pretty much. It's just mind-boggling. Going back to watching Peter Dickinson, The Flight of Dragons, that's definitely one thing that spawned my love of dragons. And again, if you haven't seen that, you really should watch it and also pick up that book. It just shows all of the really cool things that you can do scientifically with dragons and make them accurate to real life. You can make up reasons as to why they can breathe fire, why they can fly, or you could just be like, nope, it's just magic. You kind of can go either way. Trying to think of if there's anything else that I had to add to that, but...
Well, because they're like people, and that's what I find so appealing about when I wrote them. Mm-hmm. You can all hear me. I'm not going to pick up the mic. Part of the premise of my Dragon Slipper books is that this girl sneaks into a dragon cave because he's too elderly to eat her. And what do you find in a dragon cave? Treasure, right? What do you personally consider treasure? Actual gold coins and gold cups and things like that? No. If dragons are intelligent enough to talk and old and wise because they live for so many years, if you've survived that many years when people are hunting you, you must be fairly smart. Why would they all collect the same thing? And why would they collect coins they cannot go to a shop and spend? Or glasses too small for them to drink out of, like goblets and things like that. So she goes in looking for treasure, and this dragon is kind of shocked. Like, you want a goblet? She's like, yes, do you have a gold goblet? And he's like, I don't really collect dinnerware. And she realizes that he has shoes. He enjoys watching the fashion of shoes change over the years and different types of shoes that these humans wear on their feet. And so he has a kind of a shoe museum in his caves. And he has a friend who collects very small dogs and breeds dogs, much like my sister and her dogs. In fact, my sister's one dog is one of the dogs in the book, and my dog is one of the other dogs in the book. And I just realized if people go around collecting these things, I collect dragons. As a kid, I collected postcards from national parks and things like that. Why can the dragons not collect different things? And so it was so fun to play with because you had the added feature of, instead of just saying like, this elderly woman collects precious moments porcelain, it's like, if it's a giant cottage-sized dragon with huge long claws, could it collect tiny porcelain figurines? How would it pick them up? How would it dust them? And just sort of the trouble of dealing with something that size and dealing with the size difference between the human characters was so appealing to me as a writer. Like, what are the dragon's limitations? What is the human limitation of living with a dragon? Like, how do you get around and where do you sit to eat and things like that? It gave me all these possibilities for my world that just were inherent to the problem of life with a dragon.
And now I'm picturing a dragon cave full of Hummel figurines, and it's actually kind of scary.
They're watching you no matter where you stand.
Well, the dragon and human thing, and the fact that, I mean, we anthropomorphize everything. And before the panel actually started, we were talking a little bit about being able to write and get away with things in books by writing animals instead of writing humans doing the same thing.
Yes, because just before this was middle grade, and we were talking about how a lot of middle grade books where they're all animal main characters are a lot edgier. If you said that those were people doing those things, your editor would be clutching her pearls. But if you're like, oh, they're cats or moles or dragons, they're like, sure, go ahead. Have the mating scene. Side eyes, Anne McCaffrey.
Well, and Anne McCaffrey is a good one to bring in this, because I think that certainly most of the people, if not everyone in the room, has read some Anne McCaffrey at some point or another, is at least familiar with the Dragon Riders of Pern. But what I was going to say is there's certainly a linkage between, we tend to write dragons as people, but there's also some mythology that involves dragons that can become people, or that the Russian myth I was talking about at the beginning, the dragon has human daughters, and in the myth, the Tsar's
Is it
son.
Dragon Feathers?
No,
Have you ever seen that one?
It's a myths of the Skazi and Polozavoy. So it's an old collection of folklore that has anthropologist notes in it.
Oh, okay.
I'll give you the title.
Yeah. Sorry.
So it's but in the folklore, the dragon has these beautiful, beautiful daughters. So of course the hero of the story has to slay the dragon so that he can carry off the daughters and marry them. It's a little bit more pretty wordage around how that happens. But that's something that I think we see a lot in fiction, is the whole concept of dragons either becoming humans, or my daughter just asked me to draw her Dungeons and Dragons character, which is a dragonborn, which I had never even heard of. So she described it to me, and I drew it, and she loved it, thank goodness. But I was like, that's a really interesting concept I wasn't familiar with. Even though I have written a book that involves a human that's part dragon, but that's not how it worked. So it's something I thought you guys might want to talk about as well, is that whole thing of dragons that not necessarily interbreeding with humans, but can shapeshift. And is that part of the reason why we tend to ascribe so much human characteristics to some dragons?
I think that generally we like to think there's better things possible, and thinking that there's a potential that we could find some higher power or higher transformation to either ascend or be able to become a dragon is very compelling, something that I'm sure a lot of you have thought about, or at least, having a pet dragon or something like that. But I do have my anthology that I'm currently working on. They do have dragonkin, so they are able to shapeshift. The magic is fluid. They can be either, a dragon or a human. They can kind of change shape, and it's definitely something that I've always loved, and really thought that, if it's a dragon, if there's magic, if there actually is magic, there really isn't, again, a limit to what can happen, and you can have the freedom to express yourself through the dragon that you're creating, or however you're writing it. And that's really what I think everybody's been trying to do for the past, few hundreds of years, is just express themselves, but find something that they could, especially in the Chinese and the Japanese mythologies, just try to find something that's a higher form or better than mankind, that's something that they could, again, ascend to. Zach.
I totally agree, and I like what you just said about like it's kind of the best of both worlds. Because you can have that powerful form that, you know, all the wisdom and the fire breathing, if that, you know, flight and all these sort of super powered things, but then to go to a human shape as well when it is inconvenient to not be able to fit through a door or be with the one you love because they are a human, I think that is vastly appealing because it's sort of like godlike powers, but you're able to put them aside in a sense. And there has been some wonderful books that I think that part of their appeal, to me at least, is that where sort of the romantic partner is basically a shape-shifting dragon and stuff. Has anyone read Tea with the Black Dragon by R.A. McAvoy? Tea with the Black Dragon, it's very important to remember he has 5 toes. He like... if you haven't read it, I think it might be out of print. It is so worth finding. Tiny little thin book that I assumed from the cover and the thinness of it as a child was a book for children. It is not, but it is very, very good.
It's still on Kindle. It's still on Kindle.
It's on Kindle? Okay, great. And I have seen it very commonly, like in like paperback book exchanges, because it really hit big when it came out. So it's available if you're a paper person too. But basically, this lady, you know, eating alone in the hotel restaurant this one night in LA, the concierge is like, you know what, there's this gentleman that eats here alone every night, and I'll set you 2 crazy kids up, you know, and then he's like, but just so you know, when he gets drunk, he insists that he is a 5-toed imperial Chinese dragon. And it is very important you remember that he has 5 toes. And she's like, okay. And it is the most delightful, it's a mystery, but he can go back and forth between forms. And it's very appealing because on the one hand, he's a very handsome Asian man, well-dressed, well-spoken, well-educated, and then he's also a murderous dragon, and it's great. And it's very appealing. And if you kept going in the Dragon's Bane series by Barbara Hambley, which is absolutely stunningly wonderful, and which I credit for part of my obsession with having to write my own dragon book, and Brandon Sanderson is with me 100% behind that. It was like the first book he read that he liked when he was a kid. Dragon's Bane by Barbara Hambley is absolutely wonderful, and as the books progress, you start to realize that this dragon is sort of in love with this human, but he does not have a human brain. He can look like a man, but the way she handles that, because it isn't just an easy shift for them. Because your worldview, when you are so older than that world, and will continue on beyond, the way he thinks about things is so different and alien, essentially. And there is very much a star-crossed love story going on because there is no way that will really work in the long term because his brain is so different. He can make himself look like a person. He can make her look like a dragon. But it's not going to work. And it's a beautiful love story written that way, and it really makes you think.
So I have to quickly correct myself. I've been reading 5 different Russian folklore and fairy tales. So this one, the one that I was specifically talking about that has the dragon discussion, it is called Russian Fairy Tales, a choice collection of Muscovite folklore, and it's by William Ralston. So
William Ralston?
Yeah, Ralston.
What it reminded me of when you were talking about this, I have a picture. I collect a lot of dragon picture books, of course, and there's one called Dragon Feathers, and I believe the illustrator is just known as Dugoni or something like that. Like he and his wife co-write a lot of things like Dugoni, but it's called Dragon Feathers, and it's a Russian fairy tale, and the quest is to go find a feather from a dragon so that he can marry the beautiful princess and stuff. And the dragon's wife is just a lady. Like they go and talk, it's sort of like talking to the giant's wife in what is it, Jack and the Beanstalk. Yeah. Except she is just a lady. Like he goes to the palace where the dragon lives. It is a huge, terrible dragon. And there's just this beautiful woman that's his wife, and she's like, oh, I'll talk to my husband for you, you know, and it's like new, totally normal. So of course the dragon's wife is just a lady.
Yeah, and that's something that I was finding in these folktales too, is that the children of the dragon are perfectly normal human females, at least seemingly. So it's kind of fascinating to go back and see that and then go, okay, how did we justify that? The comments in this were also saying that they think that maybe rather than being the daughters of the dragon, that they were actually like captives of, and it got mythologized as daughters rather than he found some maidens somewhere, and that's what the hero was rescuing. So it's
The
kind of
word
cool.
daughter literally just means girl in the house who milks the cows. So when you read a lot of old stuff that is from like Middle English and stuff, daughter, D-O-H-T-E-R, literally just means girl in the house who milks the cows. So it does not imply any blood relation thing. So I think a lot of those stories and myths where they're like, I will marry the only other beautiful woman in the kingdom, my daughter. I'm like, that literally could have been a servant he was talking about. Like, this story may not be as shocking as we were led to believe.
So I'm thinking that based on the time, we might want to take some questions from the audience. So, and I see a hand right over there.
So what do you think of the idea of Quetzalcoatl or Leviathan being types of dragons?
Well, of course they are.
Yep, 100%.
Dinosaurs have feathers, why not
Yeah.
dragons? Yes.
Somewhat along those lines, do you know any noteworthy stories of dragons in the Americas in particular?
Well,
We seem
wrote-
to be dragon and unicornless. It's a little depressing.
It
but-
is.
Actually,
Minty.
no, wait.
Really?
Two things on that real quick. One is, so in the mythos about Coyote, some of the stories have him fighting a monster. He goes into, the monster swallows up the people. And the people is usually what any kind of tribe could call themselves. They were the people. So I'm not remembering right now off the source material which specific tribe this was, but Coyote, monster swallows the people, and Coyote goes in after them and basically from the inside cuts the monster's heart or performs some other feat and releases the people. So Coyote being the trickster god. Monster is a little bit more interesting because as I was doing the research into this, I came to the conclusion, as far as the descriptions I could find of the monster that Coyote was finding, there was a dragon or something
Really?
passing for a dragon. And the thing that's interesting there is that if you think about paleontology, we have found a lot of dinosaur skeletons here in the Americas. The Dakotas practically laying out on the surface.
Utah raptor.
Yeah, so obviously the American peoples that were here and passed through these lands had to have seen some of these bones at times, and what they were going to come up and talk about it as far as myths and legends surrounding where these things came from is probably going to be quite similar to, they were originally called dragons with some of the English people that found them and dug them up, and you can read stories about them. So, and then the other thing related to the unicorns is that there's actually, and darn it, I cannot remember the title, but there's actually a story that was told by the Canadian tribes to a fur trader, and then he wrote it down, but it very vividly describes a unicorn
Really?
as
Well,
being
that
an
is-
actual thing like that, like their grandfathers hunted.
That is Peter S. Beagle's Last Unicorn was inspired by the fact that it's one of the first colonies. It's not Jamestown, but do you know the guy's name? Oh, okay. But there is a early colonist, Puritan, super straight-laced dude who suddenly one day went back to the port after being in the woods for the day and was like, "Get me out of here," because he swore he had seen a unicorn in the woods and it told him to leave. And he went back to England, and the next year there was like a smallpox or something outbreak that killed most of his village. And that is Peter S. Beagle, and he wrote a short story about him as well called, the guy's name is something like Armando Dippet or something that sounds like Harry Pottery, but he's a real person. And it's something about like Armando Dippet's worst day or something, and he has this whole short story about why the guy was in the woods having a picnic and when he saw the unicorn and stuff, because it is like documented multiple times that that's what the guy said he saw. So, but it was like, he was British, and it was a British style unicorn, very white, and came up and told him, "Get out." So
Yeah, I will have to look that up because I can't remember. It's been a while since I looked at it. It was something that a friend of mine was like, hey, you should check this out. And I'm really terrible
So it's,
about
it's Canadian,
It's
and they told the
Canadian.
trappers, I want to look
it's,
that.
it's from the fur trader era, so we're talking late 1600s. So it's kind of cool. And I think you had a question.
I did. So in my series, I have these 3 or 4 little dragons that they're actually made out of they're metal, but they have they have personalities. They act and live and breathe and stuff like dragons, basically. Like it's one of those kind of books. Are there any certain things that you've particularly latched onto, like some personality quirks or anything like that that's special to dragons that you would recommend?
Honestly, for me, I make dragons what I think I want them to be. So I would definitely just put your voice in your dragons and not... It's your story, so they can really take on the traits that you want. I mean, there's so many different ways, and there's as many dragons as there are people. So just have fun with it.
One trend I have noticed is if they're little, I tend to see that sort of the cuter, younger, smaller dragons tend to be a bit obsessed with food. You know, with filling their bellies, their sort of immediate needs, they're sort of like toddlers or dogs. And so that could be an angle, especially if they're metal. Is it sort of like
Nuts and bolts.
Yeah, exactly. I was just gonna say, is it like batteries not included, where they like nuts and bolts and things like that? So something like that would be super cute. One of my favorite books, which is probably also out of print, but you just find it. It's called A Book Dragon, and Kusher. It's not Ellen Kushner, but it's a similar name to that. It's Dawn, D-O-N-N. Kusher, something starts with a K and a Kush. Anyway, a book dragon. This dragon can become any size depending on what he eats. If he eats larger and larger things, he gets bigger and bigger. If he lets himself eat smaller and smaller things, he gets tinier and tinier. And every dragon must have a treasure to guard, and he becomes obsessed with watching this monk illuminate a manuscript in the Middle Ages, and that becomes his treasure he guards through the years, is this manuscript. So he makes himself smaller and smaller so that he can stay in the desk and guard the manuscript and stuff like that. But it's an interesting concept for how he grows, because he also tends to take on the personality of what he is eating. If he eats too many sheep, he starts feeling sort of dull-witted and things like that, and easily scared. So I loved that, and you could tell what he had been eating by how he started behaving. And it's a tiny little book, and he managed to pack so much into it.
And my other thought too is she's mentioned dogs, and if you watch the characters and personalities of small dogs versus big dogs, they kind of have a Napoleon complex.
My 4-pound Maltese was an actual alpha female in that other dogs knew and were afraid of her. Mm-hmm. Like, we would walk through the neighborhood and she would see other dogs and start to strut towards them, and they would cower in fear. They knew from her smell she was an alpha female. My current dog's not an alpha female, and a Labradoodle tried to eat her 2 weeks ago, and she lost her spleen. Oh. She is my old lady companion dog, and she's a beta female, and I'm her alpha female, and that personality really carries across. Mm-hmm. And so it's super fascinating, because a lot of little dogs have like that, but they really have a hierarchy going on and stuff like that, even despite their size. She'll be fine. She's fine.
I see somebody way in the back there, hand all the way up.
I was just wondering, do you have any tips for me on giving dragons names? Because I find that I'm never satisfied with the names I give my dragons.
Well, my first
Clearly,
tip
you
would
haven't
be,
found the right name.
my first tip would be, don't make it something that has more consonants than vowels and can't be spelled. But actually, I think as far as choosing a name for a dragon goes, you might want to look at the culture, the kind of dragon that you're going with. A Chinese or Japanese dragon is likely to have something very different for a name than a Western dragon might have. And that, for that matter, I have a jaguar god named Steve because I cannot spell the Mayan word that
I was just going to say, that's one of my favorite sort of cheats, is like, if you've read Deep Wizardry by Diane Duane and her wonderful Young Wizard series. Deep Wizardry, this great white shark that is also a wizard, his name is it's shark language, and it's like 50 letters long and has multiple apostrophes, and they're like, so we'll call you Ed. And he's like, Ed is a name for Fry. And they're like, well, we can't say the rest of it. So they call him Ed the shark. And he's this powerful great white. But his whole thing about, like, that's a name for Fry. And when he greets them, he says, like, hello, Fry. So my older sister has called me Fry since then. But that's like, and it's in The Horse and His Boy in the Narnia books as well.
Yes.
The horse's name is Bree, hinny, hinny, hoona. You know, it's like a horse's whinny. So he calls him Bree. And it can be offensive or endearing, but you know, you can always get away with the whole. Gail Carson Levine has several words in like goblin language in her Ella Enchanted books, and I was with her when someone asked how you pronounce the one girl's hair is HTUNN is the color. It's a color that only like goblins can see. And they said to her, how do you pronounce that? And she said, well, I can't pronounce it. I'm not a goblin. And I'm like, high five.
That's wonderful.
Okay then.
I think we're
I see a hand
We
way in
are.
the back with the brace on.
So, how do you go about defining what is a dragon and what isn't a dragon?
Oh, that's an excellent question.
Oh, that's a question for like
Science us.
Well, that's a really good question because, I mean, have you ever seen a monitor lizard? Are you sure he's not a dragon?
Yes, because it doesn't breathe fire or have wings.
But do Chinese dragons have wings?
But they can fly.
Right, but they don't have wings.
Can I extrapolate on that?
Yeah.
Because I think I understand what she's trying to say. In European mythology, you have multiple things with either wings, legs, some combination. No wings, no legs. That's called a worm, but it has a Y in it.
A worm.
I call it fire drakes because I can't say that word.
Exactly.
But you've got these whole bunch of names for these different classifications. In Chinese, Korean, Japanese, it's just the one word that we translate to dragon. I don't know the Korean or the Japanese, but in Chinese it's long.
Yes.
So exactly how do you define dragon?
So I have a dragon on my front porch, and his name is Yao Long, which means herb dragon, because he's the gardener of my garden. No, you have wyverns and drakes and fire drakes and lingworms, and there's so many different names and types of dragons that it literally would take a book to define everything as far as what makes a dragon a dragon. And so I suppose it kind of comes down to, does he think he's a dragon?
Which could be part of the struggle of the plot.
Yes, indeed.
We're out of time, but
Yes.
I would look at the culture maybe that you're going for with your dragon, like if it's a British dragon, if it's a Chinese dragon, and look at the characteristics common to that, and maybe go from there.
If it's very quickly.
Well, the only characteristics that I've noticed that all dragons seem to have in common is being somewhat reptilian and a sense of majesty.
That's probably a good
Yeah.
way to leave it. Yeah.
Yeah, very nice.
awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.